Sandra Bullock was ready for a much-needed vacation, and she had a first-class ticket to paradise. Little did she know, today would not be the relaxing escape she had envisioned. As she approached the gate, Sandra was met with a commotion. A woman, clearly irritated, was arguing loudly with the airline staff. She had missed her flight and was demanding a refund, causing quite a scene. Sandra, trying to keep a low profile, discreetly navigated around the chaos, her large sunglasses and simple black jacket helping her blend in with the crowd. Just as Sandra was about to board the plane, she felt a sharp tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she was face to face with the angry woman, who had somehow managed to get past the staff and onto the plane before her. "Excuse me," the woman sneered. "Who do you think you are, walking in front of everyone like that? You're not that special." Sandra was taken aback, her mind racing. She had done nothing wrong, she was simply trying to board her flight. But before she could respond, the woman continued loud enough for the whole gate area to hear. "You're just another overpaid actress who thinks she's better than everyone else. What makes you think you can cut the line?" Sandra's face flushed with embarrassment. She hadn't even realized she'd inadvertently stepped in front of the woman while waiting. The last thing she expected was to be publicly humiliated, especially not in front of a crowd of strangers. As the woman's rant continued, Sandra took a deep breath and maintained her composure. She was used to dealing with public scrutiny, but this felt different. She could feel her heart racing as she tried to figure out how to defuse the situation without escalating it. But then, just as Sandra was about to apologize and walk away, a calm, deep voice interrupted the exchange. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" Sandra turned, startled to see none other than Keanu Reeves standing nearby, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He had been watching the entire scene unfold from a distance, quietly observing without drawing attention to himself. Now he stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of the entire gate. The woman, still fuming, turned her anger toward him. "Yes, there's a problem. This woman thinks she's too important to wait her turn. And Actually, Keanu interrupted smoothly, she wasn't cutting in line. She's a paying customer, just like you. And honestly, if you're looking to argue with someone, I'd suggest finding a more suitable venue." The woman's mouth opened in shock, clearly not expecting Keanu Reeves of all people to be standing up for Sandra. She had no idea who he was, but the way the crowd was reacting, the murmurs and quick glances toward the two stars, told her she was in no position to keep fighting. Sandra shot Keanu a grateful look, a little stunned at his intervention. The tension in the air had shifted, and the woman huffed in frustration before turning and storming off. Keanu chuckled lightly, offering Sandra a small smile. "Are you all right?" Sandra, still trying to process the whole ordeal, nodded, her embarrassment starting to fade. "Yeah, I think I'm good now. Thanks for stepping in." Keanu shrugged modestly, his trademark calm demeanor still in full force. "Sometimes it's just about knowing when to step in. You didn't deserve that." As they boarded the plane together, Sandra couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, not just because the confrontation was over, but because Keanu Reeves, the legendary actor she'd admired for years, had seen the whole thing and had her back. The tension between them was gone, and an unexpected sense of camaraderie filled the air. "Looks like we're seatmates," Sandra said, glancing at her boarding pass and then at Keanu's. "Guess so," Keanu replied with a grin. The two settled into their seats, the incident already becoming a thing of the past. Little did Sandra know, Keanu's quiet support had turned what could have been an embarrassing moment into a shared experience, one they'd both remember for years to come. Title: Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves' Unexpected Adventure. The plane wasn't their only challenge. As the plane soared into the clouds, Sandra and Keanu settled into their seats, both trying to shake off the awkwardness of the earlier encounter. Sandra leaned back against her plush seat, closing her eyes for a moment of peace, while Keanu stared out the window, lost in thought. It was a well-deserved vacation for both of them, but it seemed fate had other plans. Just as the captain made the announcement for passengers to fasten their seatbelts, a sudden sharp jolt sent everyone in the cabin lurching forward. The overhead compartments rattled, and the entire plane seemed to dip for a split second before stabilizing. Gasps echoed through the cabin, and Sandra's heart raced. Keanu immediately turned to her, his calm demeanor never wavering. "You okay?" he asked, his voice steady. Sandra nodded, gripping the armrest. "I think so." "What was that?" Keanu's eyes scanned the cabin, looking for signs of anything unusual. The flight attendants rushed through the aisles, reassuring passengers. "I don't know," he said, his voice still calm but with a hint of concern. "But it doesn't look like anything major, just a bit of turbulence." As the flight went on, Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She glanced over at Keanu, who seemed unfazed by the turbulence. He'd been through his share of action-packed moments, but this was different. Then, a sudden announcement came over the intercom. The captain's voice was strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a minor technical issue. Please remain calm and follow the instructions from the crew." Sandra's stomach dropped. She was no stranger to traveling, but this felt off. Keanu, ever the calming presence, leaned toward her. "Don't worry," he said softly, his hand briefly touching hers in reassurance. "We're in good hands. Just a small hiccup, nothing more." But as time passed, the situation escalated. The plane began to descend at an uncomfortable angle, and the cabin crew moved with purpose, assisting passengers with oxygen masks and instructions on what to do in case of an emergency landing. Keanu's cool exterior remained, but Sandra noticed his mind working. He was no stranger to high-stakes situations, both in his career and in his personal life. With his experience, Sandra trusted him. "We're going to be okay," Keanu said, his eyes meeting hers again. "Just keep calm and breathe. We'll get through this together." The plane began its descent into a remote, unknown area. They were far from their original destination. The nervous energy in the cabin was palpable, but Sandra and Keanu maintained their composure. Minutes felt like hours as the plane slowly touched down on a small, makeshift runway. The engines sputtered before the plane came to a complete stop, the emergency lights flashing. The passengers were silent for a moment, before a loud cheer erupted in relief. "We're safe," Sandra whispered to herself, her hands shaking as she unbuckled her seatbelt. Keanu, his trademark smile returning, turned to her. "Told you, we're always safer with a little bit of luck and the right company." The crew quickly ushered the passengers out of the plane, so guiding them toward a nearby hangar. They were stranded on an isolated airstrip, far from civilization. Sandra and Keanu shared a glance, both processing the bizarre turn of events. As they disembarked, Keanu whispered with a smirk, "Well, it seems like our vacation just became an adventure." Sandra couldn't help but laugh. Despite the tense situation, Keanu's presence made her feel grounded. Together, they walked toward the hangar, where they were promised more details on what had happened. Little did Sandra know, this unexpected detour would lead to a series of wild adventures, ones that would test their resilience, build an unexpected bond, and remind them both that sometimes the best stories come from the most unlikely of situations. And as the two stars stood together on that runway, ready to face whatever came next, they couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement. What had started as a moment of humiliation had quickly turned into something much bigger, an adventure that neither of them would ever forget. Title: Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, Stranded and Unlikely Heroes. The hangar was dimly lit, with only a few workers moving in and out, making the situation feel even more surreal. Sandra and Keanu, along with the other passengers, were herded inside and given water, but there was no sign of when they might be able to continue their journey. Sandra glanced around, noticing the faces of the other passengers, some nervous, others quietly resigned. But despite the chaotic circumstances, Keanu remained as calm as ever, his presence reassuring. "So what's the plan?" Sandra asked, trying to break the silence. "We just wait here until someone figures it out?" Keanu gave her a small smile. "Seems like it, but knowing this place, it might take a while before someone comes to our rescue." They exchanged a look, a mutual understanding passing between them. They were both used to dealing with unexpected situations, but this one felt different. Out here on a remote airstrip, there was no paparazzi, no staff to handle the crisis, no script to follow. It was just them, stranded with a bunch of strangers, waiting to figure out what was next. "Not exactly the getaway I had in mind," Sandra said with a wry smile. Definitely not what I imagined either, Keanu replied, chuckling softly. But hey, life's full of surprises, right? As the hours passed, the passengers grew restless, and Sandra found herself talking more with Keanu. They shared stories of their careers, funny moments from past projects, and a bit about their personal lives. The connection was easy, as though they had known each other far longer than the few minutes they had spent together earlier in the airport. The temperature dropped as night began to fall, and Sandra pulled her jacket tighter around herself. The hangar was cold, and the group was starting to feel the discomfort of waiting, with no word on when they'd be able to leave. Keanu, noticing her shivering slightly, offered her his spare jacket. "Here, you'll probably be warmer in this," he said, slipping it over her shoulders. Sandra looked up at him, surprised by the gesture. "Thanks," she said softly, a bit embarrassed. She hadn't expected that from someone like him, someone with such a cool, unflappable persona. "No problem," Keanu replied with his usual calm, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that signature smile. "We've got to look out for each other." Just then, the sound of an engine broke the stillness of the hangar. A small crew of workers who had been trying to repair the plane approached, explaining that it wasn't going to be safe to take off anytime soon. The airport staff were making arrangements for buses to take the passengers to the nearest city for the night. "Looks like we're not leaving anytime soon," Sandra said, looking up at Keanu with a raised eyebrow. "You know what this means, right?" Keanu raised an eyebrow in return. "What's that?" "We have to entertain ourselves," Keanu chuckled. "I think we can manage." As they were herded onto the buses, the awkwardness of being stranded faded. They were still a long way from their original destination, but now they had each other's company to lean on. The journey to the city was long, and the passengers were exhausted, but something about the absurdity of the situation made it easier to handle. Once they finally arrived at a small hotel in the nearby town, Sandra and Keanu were assigned rooms next door to each other. They exchanged a quick good night, but before Sandra could shut the door to her room, Keanu knocked lightly. "Hey, I don't know about you, but I could really use a drink after all of that," he said with a grin. Sandra, feeling the stress of the day melt away in Keanu's presence, smiled. "You know what? I think that's exactly what I need." They spent the evening in the hotel bar, laughing and swapping stories, the awkward tension from earlier forgotten in the warmth of the moment. What started as an ordeal had unexpectedly turned into a night of camaraderie. They had bonded over a shared crisis, and somehow, in the midst of the chaos, they had found an unlikely but meaningful friendship. As the night wore on, Keanu and Sandra found themselves talking less about the craziness of the day and more about their lives outside of Hollywood. Keanu shared a few insights into his love for motorcycles and his love for quiet, solitary time. Sandra talked about her passion for charity work and her determination to stay grounded in a world of fame. "You know," Sandra said, nursing her drink, "I wasn't expecting any of this. A flight delay, a crazy woman, a plane malfunction, and now a random night out with Keanu Reeves. It's definitely not the vacation I planned, but I think it might be the one I needed." Keanu smiled warmly. Sometimes the best adventures are the ones we never plan for. The night ended with a sense of peace between them, the connection growing stronger. They may have been stranded in an unexpected place, but somehow it felt like exactly where they were supposed to be, together, finding a bit of light in an otherwise chaotic situation. As they parted ways for the night, Sandra paused, looking back at Keanu. "Hey Keanu, thanks for everything today. I'm really glad we're stuck together." Keanu gave her one last smile. "Me too, Sandra, me too."